Williams defines the sides in War in Heaven as a literal battle war in heaven between good and evil, between those who follow Satan and those who follow God. Of course, this is more of a false conception based on probably Williams' reading of Milton and not really an understanding from Scripture or from church tradition. There is room, however, for the lukewarm or neutral parties in the narrative, and we do get to see those people performing different functions as well. The neutral parties include Mr. Batesby, the actual pastor of Fardell's, and the Rackstraws. In essence, the neutral parties end up being pawns for the various sides. By not choosing, they in a sense lose their ability to choose until they ultimately, almost in the case of Barbara Rackstraw, lose their life. Mr. Batesby is a rather humorous character, much like the pastors may be drawn from Jane Austen's narrative. He enjoys Parsimmons and does not see him as evil. He does not get uncomfortable around him the way the archdeacon is uncomfortable with him. He loves his ideas about progress and the future, and does not hear within that narrative Persimmon's antagonism towards children, his desire to control them and to do his will rather than follow God's will. The Rackstraws are also problematic in that they want to be neutral parties, that they don't think of things, they don't go to church, they don't think of things like good and evil on a regular basis. Lionel Rackstraw is, if anything, he's a pessimist. When he finds the corpse in his office, he is upset that it happened to him. When Parsimmons tries to draw him towards his side, he instead finds a barrier. The cynicism and pessimism of Rackstraw may not be open to God, but nor is it open to Satan. When Parsimmons tries to elicit a desire for power and greed, Rackstraw calls Satan the clerk at the brothel, a symbol that Persimmons finds ludicrous because, of course, he's a follower of Satan. He thinks that there's great power in Satan. One has to think of the saints' narrative, St. Christopher, the giant from Canaan, who at first followed a king because he thought the king was most powerful, and then found that the king was afraid of the devil. And so Christopher followed the devil into the desert. And then the desert ran into a cross, and the devil was afraid. And so Christopher then followed the cross, but he didn't know what it meant to follow the cross. And so he goes to a hermit and he asks, "What do I do to follow the cross?" And the hermit says, "Build your house by a river and carry anyone who needs to be carried across, because you're a giant." Christopher carries everyone across until one day a small child comes. And he puts the child on his shoulders, and as he's walking across, the child's burden grows heavier and heavier and heavier. And when he finally crosses the stream, he realizes the child is Jesus. So this narrative in the saint's story is much like the War in Heaven, in the sense that the things that appear to be light and innocent, Adrian, or the Holy Grail, just this empty cup that's kind of dinged everywhere, actually carry the greatest burden or weight of spiritual significance in the narrative. And those who think that they're following after power are actually always afraid of something, and the only ones who are not afraid are the most powerful. In this case, it is the one who seemed to be defeated. It is Christ on the cross. And the devil doesn't have any power compared to Christ's victory on the cross. And so I think we see the same thing in the War in Heaven narrative. Lionel Rackstraw sees neither party as powerful, but nor is he afraid of either one. But he comes to be afraid when he is about to lose Barbara's life to this evil. Barbara had drifted, like most people, neither for God nor for his enemies, but this has left her defenseless in a way that Lionel's cynicism has become a barrier against Satanism, but also against Christ. Barbara has drifted neutrally, neither for one party nor against it. And so when she's face to face with evil, it's an intruder, and she doesn't know how to protect herself or how to be protected. And it is not until she's about to fall off the cliff into nothingness, which is what Gregory Persimmons is hoping for. He's using her as a pawn in his game to see what side she'll land on. that she actually falls into grace. And she encounters Prester John, who is kind of the representation of Christ's goodness in this world. Prester John is a unique character. He is a mythical character. In this story, several people don't know what race he is. They just see him as foreign, maybe as Eastern. They don't know if he's black. They don't know if he's Indian. They don't know if he's Asian. And they are derogatory towards any of those possibilities. When Gregory Persimmons encounters him in his home, he becomes very angry. He wants to pulverize the man, and he doesn't know why. And he feels as though he cannot control his anger towards this force. Prester John, on the other hand, when he encounters Gregory, he knows more about Gregory than Gregory realizes. He actually smells the decay off the man. As we've mentioned, he's moving downwards towards nothingness in his allegiance to Satan. And by doing so, he's becoming unmade, he's becoming unmanned, and becoming less of a human being. Barbara encounters Prester John when she falls into safety and recognizes him. And this is the great good news from the Gospels, that those who did not know Christ, as it mentions in Romans, that there is a revelation. There will come a time where they will recognize one side or the other. This is similar in the story of Chronicles of Narnia, the very last one, the last battle, when you have a character who has been able to finally recognize Aslan as the good and enter Aslan's country, whereas he didn't know him before, right? But then he recognizes him at once. So Barbara, too, then recognizes Prester John at once as that safety, at least. The most evil character who doesn't get a lot of attention is Sir Giles Tumulty, who at one point someone says is part hyena and part cobra. I think Kenneth Mornington calls him part hyena and part cobra. And yet when Prester John encounters him, he doesn't see a cobra or a hyena. He sees him as little. He calls him an ant who's inside the grail and won't be able to get out of it. So he's a pest among men. He's not an evil force to be reckoned with, but he's a pest, much like Dick Devine / Lord Feverstone in That Hideous Strength in the Ransom trilogy in Lewis, who is always only for himself and thus moves from evil to good willy-nilly, just really not dependent on anything except for his ability to see what's going to benefit him the most in the long run. Prester John also foretells Mornington's death, but he foretells it in an interesting way. He uses the words of Christ and says, "I tell you, at the end of this day, you will see me in paradise." And there's a sense that Prester John is the emissary for Christ in the ways that he uses Christ's language and the ways that he represents his authority over the Grail. The novel concludes with a beautiful scene in which the Archdeacon is helped by Prester John to give the Eucharist. And we have known for a few chapters the Archdeacon was no longer for this world. The Prester John himself has told him that there will just be a little bit longer, that he will only have a few more things to do. And so the novel concludes with Gregory Persimmons going rightly off to jail. The evil forces have been defeated. And as the Archdeacon is holding the Grail up, the Rackstraws, the Duke, everyone is at this church service. And it says, he seemed to hold the Grail no more. The divine color that had moved in that vision of creation swathed him as a close-bound robe. Beyond him, the church was again visible, and silence succeeded to the flying music that accompanied vision. Like the center of that silence, they heard his voice calling as if he called a name. He had not turned, still faced the altar, and thrice he called and was still. The Archdeacon stood up in his stall, came sedately from it, turned, smiled at those who watched, made a motion of farewell, and went to the sanctuary. He disappears, in a sense, with the Grail, that by serving this moment of Eucharist, he is taken up, kind of like Enoch or Elijah or Moses. He's taken up into heaven and they see him no more. And so you get the sense that this Grail becomes the conduit, and he receives the Lord's mercy here. Charles Williams died having hoped to receive this mercy. On his tombstone are the same words that the archdeacon uses throughout the narrative, that he repeats over and over again. His mercy endureth forever. His mercy endureth forever. And this is Williams's tombstone that also says, his mercy endureth forever. Williams was not a great man, though Auden and Eliot said to be in his presence seemed to be in the presence of a saint. In fact, the Inklings did not know that the occult visions that come from the war in heaven were probably drawn heavily from Williams's own experiences. And Williams still was in this kind of mode even during his time with the Inklings. And lots of things have come out biographically about ways that he assaulted young women and the ways that he tried to use his power to control other people. And these have come out. These were a secret life, in a sense, that he lived, different from the life that everybody else saw as this person of the publishing house. And if you read it in light of his biography, you get a sense that maybe he was always struggling between the desire to be like the archdeacon and this reality that he feared he was more like Gregory Persimmons. And you get that internal battle that is represented perhaps in Williams's character. If we concluded with that, it would be somewhat negative to think of him as Gregory Persimmons. Instead, we have to think that his mercy endures and that Charles Williams was at last conquered by the archdeacon's side of himself, and his mercy endureth forever.